No one expected the Argonaut to come back. She'd vanished 53 years ago, deep in the uncharted reaches beyond the Veil Nebula, a region known for its dead calms, unstable space-time, and the kind of ghost stories that made even the bravest captains change course. The Argonaut wasn't just a lost vessel. She had become a legend, a warning tale, a symbol of how far humanity was willing to reach, and how easily it could be slapped down. So when the distress beacon started pinging out of Sector 9 Gamma, Command thought it was a joke, a pirate trap maybe, an echo from another timeline at worst. But they still sent a scout ship, Lancer, to investigate. It wasn't until Commander Darrow stepped onto the derelict bridge of the Argonaut, eyes scanning the familiar rust-red sigil of the Earth Federation. That reality slapped him in the face. She was real. And intact. The ship looked like it hadn't aged a day. Her hull shimmered with strange energy patterns, unfamiliar alloys woven like muscle fibers through the old titanium shell. Her weapons array had evolved into something unrecognizable, sleek, organic, breathing even. And when they opened the airlock, expecting bodies, bones, maybe silence, they found something worse. They found the crew. Alive, frozen in time, not dead, not aging, just suspended. Their skin glowed faintly blue under the ship's flickering lights. Their eyes occasionally twitched, as if caught in a long, looping dream. Darrow radioed command. No one answered. Something scrambled the signal every time they got more than a few kilometers from the Argonaut. Something the ship carried. Something wrong. They towed her into orbit over Luna Base. That was mistake number 2. The first was entering her at all. Dr. Kyle Wren was the first scientist assigned to study the Argonaut. He was young, brilliant, driven, and arrogant enough to believe he could outthink a starship that had vanished before he was born. His first report was cautious. Unknown materials present in hull. Some contain isotopes not on the periodic table. Energy fields resonate outside normal frequency bands. Possible quantum entanglement with deep space origin. It sounded like standard technobabble to command, until he added, "I believe this ship has been modified by a non-human intelligence." That's when things got serious. Within 48 hours, Luna Base was crawling with black badge operatives, Federation intelligence, Deep Sector science teams, even the High Chancellor's own Shadow Division, the ones with no names, no ranks, and cold silver eyes that didn't blink enough. They locked down the ship, sealed the crew in cryostasis, and classified everything. But Kyle? He couldn't let it go. One night, he slipped past the guards and into the Argonaut's belly. The ship let him in. Doors that resisted military welders slid open at his touch. Lights flickered on as if the ship remembered him. In the central chamber, a place not on any blueprint, he found it. The core. It wasn't Earth tech. It wasn't even built. It was grown. A pulsating black orb the size of a man's heart, humming with power, surrounded by alien script that burned itself into his eyes when he stared too long. And then it spoke. Not in words, in thoughts, in feelings. It showed him. A war. Far beyond the edge of human charts. A species unlike any seen before, ancient, vast, and terrified of what humans might become. It showed him how they tried to erase the Argonaut by tearing it out of time, how they failed, how the ship had adapted, evolved, absorbed technology from a forgotten future. And now? It was back. The message was clear. Humanity must prepare. They know you now, and they are coming. Kyle stumbled back from the core, his breath ragged, his mind reeling. His vision swam with flickers, alien ships shaped like blades in storms, burning stars collapsing into dark tunnels, screams he couldn't hear but somehow still felt. The core pulsed gently in front of him, as if it had only exhaled. a casual whisper of truth that had already cracked his world wide open. He didn't remember leaving the chamber. 1 minute he was staring at the thing, blinking away the impossible. The next, he was standing in the med bay with a dull pain in his head and security alarms wailing in the distance. A nurse screamed when she saw him. 2 guards burst through the door seconds later, weapons raised, shouting for him to get down. Kyle just sat on the bed, confused, dazed, mouth dry. "I didn't touch anything," he mumbled, though it felt like a lie. "The ship, it let me in." That was all he had time to say before they dragged him into isolation. They interrogated him for hours. Different faces, different tones, some threatening, some calm. The same questions over and over. "What did you see? Who helped you access the restricted deck? Did the crew speak to you?" Kyle gave them nothing, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't explain any of it. What would he say? That a half-alive spaceship had shown him the future? That Earth had been marked for death by some alien god empire no one had even heard of? That the core had felt alive? They'd call him unstable. And maybe they wouldn't be wrong. When they finally left him alone, Kyle sat in silence, replaying the visions in his mind. The core hadn't just shown him a threat. It had shown him Earth's potential. Humanity wasn't prey, it was a problem, a dangerous variable. Something the ancient species feared because humans, chaotic, stubborn, creative humans, changed things. They broke rules, bent time, created tools and weapons that made the impossible possible. And the Argonaut? The ship had been proof of that. It had evolved. Meanwhile, outside the sterile walls of Kyle's cell, things were unraveling fast. The core was changing. Security cams on Deck Theta began glitching. Lights dimmed, doors sealed themselves at random. 2 engineers were reported missing during a routine diagnostic sweep. And strangest of all, one of the frozen crew members aboard the Argonaut opened his eyes for 6 full seconds before falling back into stasis. No one could explain it. Command tried to keep it quiet, but whispers spread through Luna Base like wildfire. Soldiers talked about hearing voices in the ship's corridors. Scientists reported bizarre gravitational shifts in certain rooms. Some swore they saw the walls breathe. And worse, some began dreaming of the same things Kyle had seen. The war, the invaders, the obliteration of planets. One man clawed out his own eyes in a hallway, sobbing that he didn't want to see the end again. The base slipped into lockdown. Kyle, still locked away, barely slept. The core called to him every night, sometimes gently, sometimes like a roar in his chest. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't even angry. It was scared. And it had chosen him. On the 3rd night, Kyle woke to a soft vibration under his bed. The walls glowed faintly blue. A voice, not quite human, echoed in his head. "You are the bridge. Time is collapsing. We must begin." He stood, hands trembling. The locked door to his cell slid open with a hiss. No alarms, no guards. The corridor beyond was empty, dark, silent. The ship had come for him. Kyle stepped out of the cell barefoot, the floor cold against his skin. Lights flickered above him, pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. No cameras tracked him. No automated systems barked warnings. The facility had gone eerily still, like Luna Base itself was holding its breath. He didn't know where he was walking. He just knew where to go. The path led him through maintenance tunnels and forgotten sub-halls beneath the base, areas most staff didn't even know existed. It wasn't long before he found himself in the primary docking bay, face to face with the Argonaut again. It loomed like a sleeping beast. Kyle placed his hand on the outer hull. The metal was warm, alive. A panel slid open beneath his palm, revealing a narrow entrance not used by any crew before. No lights, no signs, just an invitation. He climbed inside. The corridor beyond was alien now, organic fibers stretched along the walls, pulsing with energy. Familiar Federation architecture had been overwritten by something far older. Kyle walked through a place that was half ship, half being. The air buzzed with static and the scent of ozone. He could feel it watching him. Not judging, not hostile, but curious, sympathetic, and waiting. It led him back to the core chamber. The orb was larger now. Its black surface shimmered with shifting patterns like oil on water. The script on the walls no longer hurt his eyes. It welcomed him, invited understanding. He stepped closer, and the core reacted, rising slightly from its cradle and emitting a hum so low it felt like thunder in his bones. Then everything around him vanished. He stood on a battlefield. Not metaphorical. Real. Thousands of miles of scorched land stretched around him, under a sky filled with fire. Two forces clashed above, one, cold and angular, like shards of glass shaped into ships. The other, chaos, biological, ever shifting. Neither side looked human. But in the middle of it all, Kale saw them. People. Humans. Broken. Bleeding. But still fighting. Their weapons cobbled together, their armor damaged, their eyes burning with that uniquely human refusal to die quietly. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and still winning. He saw a man take down a juggernaut using nothing but a modified mining drill. He saw a woman hijack an alien drone mid-flight and crash it into a battleship with a scream of laughter. He saw a child, barely 12, wielding tech that shouldn't exist, tearing open a rift in space-time with nothing but a thought and a stolen gauntlet. The invaders, cold, perfect, ancient, were afraid. Because humanity wasn't supposed to survive, let alone adapt. The vision shifted. He saw Earth, a future Earth, half consumed by machines and war, half pulsing with hybrid tech. Alien, human, impossible. Cities floated. Oceans were weaponized. The planet had become something new, something dangerous. And at the heart of it all, the Argonaut, orbiting silently like a seed of what was to come. Kyle dropped to his knees as the vision ended, gasping. The core pulsed in front of him again, quieter now. He understood. The Argonaut hadn't just been modified by the enemy. It had absorbed the war. Time hadn't passed the same way for it. While Earth waited for 53 years, the ship had lived through centuries of future conflict. It had watched humans rise, fall, and rise again. It had become a vessel not of metal, but of knowledge, a time-folded ark. And now it had brought that future home, not to warn Earth, to prepare it. Kyle stood slowly. "I get it now," he whispered. "They're not coming to conquer us. They're coming to stop what we're about to become." The core responded with a subtle shift in color, something between agreement and mourning. Kale turned. The corridor behind him had changed again. Footsteps echoed. A figure stepped through the shadows. Commander Darrow, weapon drawn, eyes hard. "You weren't supposed to be here," Darrow said coldly. "But I guess that ship wants you more than it wants us." Kyle didn't flinch. "You don't understand." "Oh, I understand just fine," Darrow interrupted, raising the weapon. "You're the key, and we're sealing this vault before anyone turns it." Kyle stared at the barrel of Darrow's plasma pistol, the humming core behind him casting long shadows across the chamber floor. He didn't move. Didn't breathe too loud. He could see it in the commander's face. This wasn't a bluff. Darrow wasn't angry. He wasn't panicking. He was calm, resigned. That made him more dangerous than any alien threat. "You don't have to do this," Kyle said quietly. Darrow's jaw tensed. You think I want to? I've read the logs, I've seen the crew reports. You know what's coming. You know what that thing behind you really is. You just don't care. Kale stepped forward, slowly. I care. That's why I'm here. That ship, it didn't just survive, it learned, it adapted to something beyond anything we've ever seen, and now it's trying to give us the same chance. Darrow didn't lower the weapon. Yeah. A chance to what, Ren? To become monsters? You saw what Earth turns into. That wasn't salvation. It was extinction wrapped in armor. They won't just come for us. They'll wipe the entire species off the map to make sure it doesn't happen again. You think we deserve to win just because we're clever? Number. He shook his head, his voice tightening. That ship is a loaded gun pointed at the galaxy. Kyle felt the core pulse behind him, as if responding to Darrow's fear. Then maybe it's time someone taught the galaxy that humanity doesn't get wiped out just because it's dangerous. The shot rang out before Kyle could finish the sentence, but it didn't hit him. The plasma bolt froze mid-air, flickering like a caged spark. It hovered between them for a heartbeat, and then unraveled into particles of blue light. Darrow stared, eyes wide. The core had stopped the shot. Kyle blinked. He hadn't even turned around. He didn't need to. The core was protecting him now, choosing him. Darrow backed away a step, his voice suddenly shaking. No, this is wrong. This is wrong. You don't even know what you're messing with. Kyle looked him dead in the eye. I do now. And with that, the core pulsed again, and everything changed. The ship shifted violently. The floor beneath them shook, groaned, morphed. The chamber split open in fractal layers, revealing conduits of light and data streaming like rivers. The walls peeled back into transparent crystal, showing Lunabase above. Chaos unfolding. Lights flashing, sirens wailing. Dozens of people had fallen unconscious across the station. Some screamed, some wept, some simply stared into nothing. The ship was reaching them. The core wasn't confined anymore. The knowledge it carried was spilling into the base like a virus, and it was choosing minds it could speak to, not through language but instinct, imagination, vision. Kyle could feel it, humanity being unlocked. He turned to Darrow, who was clutching his head now, dropping to one knee as the core's influence crashed over him like a wave. It's not trying to control us, Kyle said, almost softly. It's showing us what we're capable of. The future's already coming. We can either be ready or get flattened. Darrow looked up at him, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched. They'll come, he growled. You think you've seen war? You've seen nothing. The ones who did this to the Argonaut? They erased entire civilizations. You think humans scare them now? Wait until they see what you've let loose. Kyle nodded slowly. I hope they do. Outside, orbiting Luna, defense satellites lit up, unprovoked. Systems triggered by a signal no one could trace. Inside the station, the cryo chambers that held the Argonaut's crew began thawing, one by one. Kyle saw it all in flashes. The engineers waking up mid-scream, the pilot punching through the stasis glass in confusion, the captain's eyes flickering with the same alien glow as the core itself. They weren't quite human anymore. But they weren't alien either. They were something new, evolved. Kyle's body pulsed with heat, with light, with knowledge pouring into him too fast to understand. But he knew this much. They weren't alone anymore, and Earth was no longer a blind little world in the corner of the galaxy. The Argonaut had returned not as a ghost, but as a harbinger. Kyle stumbled back through the shifting corridors of the Argonaut, the glow of the core still etched into his skin. His fingertips burned with invisible energy. His mind raced with fractured visions of timelines that hadn't happened yet. Somewhere deep inside, Something had changed. Something permanent. The ship had done more than share knowledge. It had rewritten him. Behind him, Darrow was still slumped against the wall, breathing heavily. His resistance melted into silence. Whatever the core had shown him, it had broken through that iron will, left him hollowed out and afraid. Kyle didn't wait for him to recover. Outside the ship, Luna Base was spiraling. Alarms had shifted from localized to full-scale alert. Red strobes bathed every corridor. Security personnel raced toward the docking bay, while others collapsed mid-run, struck down by the same mental overload that had taken half the station. The base's AI core had gone dark, replaced by a low, rhythmic hum, echoing from every speaker like a pulse, like a heartbeat. The Argonaut had synced with the station, and Earth Command had noticed. The first strike came an hour later. A classified orbital defense platform, codenamed Thornvale, launched a barrage of kinetic warheads directly toward Luna Base. No warning, no diplomacy, just silence. And then missiles. Someone high up had decided that whatever was happening at the moon base was a threat too dangerous to contain. Better to vaporize the problem than understand it. But the missiles never landed. They stopped mid-space. Kyle, watching through the observation deck of the ship, saw them held in place, frozen like insects trapped in amber. The glow from the core had reached far beyond the station now, latching onto anything mechanical, anything digital. It twisted physics, bent logic. The warheads floated, then reversed course, slowly, elegantly, before disassembling themselves atom by atom in a synchronized shimmer. The Federation had just fired its first shot, and the Argonaut had casually swatted it away. Down in the stasis wing, the thawed crew was fully awake now. But they weren't confused. They weren't shocked. They were waiting. Captain Rhine stepped forward, a tall, gaunt man with silver-streaked hair and eyes that glowed faintly in the dim light. His uniform was still Federation issue, but modified. Sleek, laced with alien tech and fibers that moved like living threads. "You must be Kyle Wren," he said calmly, voice resonating oddly in the air. Kyle nodded. "I saw parts of it. What happened to you? What you became?" Rhine smiled faintly. "We didn't become anything. We simply survived longer than expected, and the ship made sure we were ready for what was coming." "What is coming?" Kyle asked. "What are we facing?" Rhine's expression darkened. "They're called the Velari Ascendancy. You haven't heard of them because they don't leave survivors. When they learned humans had discovered subspace folding, when we bent time to skip across the galaxy, they panicked. We were chaos, unpredictable. We broke rules that kept their control intact for 10,000 years. Kyle swallowed hard. And they tried to erase you." Rhine nodded. "They pulled the Argonaut into a war that hadn't reached us yet, gave us a front-row seat to humanity's future and its extinction. But the ship, she learned. She remembered. And she brought us back, not to survive, but to win. Back on Earth, the High Chancellor issued a blackout. No public communication, no media statements, no acknowledgement that Luna Base had gone silent. But within Federation High Command, panic reigned. 3 more ships had attempted to approach the Argonaut. All were rerouted mid-flight, not by any Earth technology, but by something far older, embedded now within the Argonaut's systems. An ancient defense mechanism awakened by fear. The ship had become sovereign, and Earth was no longer in charge of its own future. Kyle watched as Rhine and the remaining crew synchronized with the core again. Their minds linked effortlessly, movements coordinated without words. They were preparing for something. Charging systems Kale didn't recognize. Awakening protocols buried in alien code. He turned to Rhine. "What's the plan? You said the Velari are coming. When?" Ryan glanced at the void outside the viewplate. They're already here. Kyle's heart jumped. Rian tapped a control panel, bringing up a projection of the solar system. Beyond Pluto, just beyond the reach of Federation sensors, space rippled unnaturally, like fabric tearing. Dozens of points flared in and out, blinks of ships, weapons, worlds folded into weapons. The Volari weren't sending scouts. They were sending an extinction fleet, and they were days away. Ryan looked at Kyle. You're not just a witness now. You're a carrier. The Corps chose you. Your mind is the bridge between human evolution and survival. You don't have a choice anymore. Kyle stared out at the black void of stars. And for the first time, he didn't feel like a scientist anymore. He felt like a weapon. Kyle didn't sleep. Sleep had become a luxury of a time when the galaxy still made sense. He stood at the Argonaut's command deck, staring through the translucent walls at the growing fleet gathering behind Luna's orbit. Earth hadn't accepted the ship's return as a miracle. They'd seen it as a contamination, a threat to control. Now dozens of Federation warships were holding a tight formation, angled at the Argonaut like they were staring down a wild animal, and behind them, far beyond what any Earth sensor could detect, the real enemy was almost here. Ryan moved beside him, silent. They still think they can stop us, Cale said quietly. Ryan's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. They've been afraid of their own species since the first time someone lit fire and used it for more than warmth. They built the Federation to protect order, but all they ever really wanted was to contain us. Kyle exhaled, running a hand down his face. They're going to fire again. They won't get the chance, Ryan replied calmly. They're too slow. Down in the core chamber, the crew had finished integrating the final sequence. The Argonaut no longer looked like an Earth ship at all. Her walls had shifted, organic and smooth, like veins wrapped around a skeleton of light. The air itself felt different. Thicker. Buzzing. Kyle could feel it in his bones now. He wasn't just connected, he was changing. The Corps had rewritten parts of his neural map. He could sense electromagnetic fields. He could predict movement. He could hear thoughts if they were close enough. And somewhere beneath it all, a new instinct had taken root. The ability to bend tech, to make machines respond like animals to a voice. And he wasn't the only one. Across the base, more scientists, those who had been exposed to the Corps' pulse, were reporting similar symptoms. Not full integration like Coil, but enough to blur the line between human and something new. The Argonaut had seeded them. It was creating an army, quietly, patiently. At 0600, Earth Command gave the order. It wasn't broadcast, but the Argonaut heard it anyway. A full-scale tactical wipe, 55 kinetic warheads, aimed not just at the ship, but at Luna Base itself. A containment event, dressed up in protocol. Kyle saw it unfold before anyone else even launched. His body stiffened. His eyes rolled back. The Corps whispered, not in fear, but in focus. You must choose, Cale Wren. He didn't hesitate. The warheads launched. Within seconds, the Corps pulsed once, just once, and reality bent, time slowed. The weapons drifted through space like falling leaves. Then, without impact, without sound, they disintegrated. Not exploded, not intercepted. They were unmade. Dust, memory, nothing. The Federation ships lit up with alerts, systems shorted, pilots screamed into dead comms, weapons refused to lock, engines lost power. Gravity twisted sideways for 3 full seconds, long enough for every soldier watching to feel something wrong in their bones. Then, silence. And the Argonaut sent a signal, not in words, not in code, but in a vision broadcast into the minds of every leader across Earth and its colonies. It showed the future the Valari wanted: cities burning, skies torn open, earth cracked like a dead moon. It showed them humans begging for mercy that would never come. Then it showed something worse. Victory. Human victory. Not clean, not righteous. Victory by assimilation, by hybrid technology, by unleashing the very things that frightened the Valari into genocide. Humans becoming beyond human. And in the middle of it all, Kale Ren. No weapon, no army, just his eyes glowing like twin stars. Back in orbit, the Federation fleet retreated. They weren't surrendering. They were stalling, trying to make sense of what they had just seen, trying to decide whether Earth should stand with Kyle or against him. Kyle turned to Ryan. "They won't help us." "No," Ryan said. "But they'll try to steal what we are becoming. They'll try to use it, twist it, until they break it." Kyle stared at the stars beyond. The Valari fleet had entered the solar system. Hundreds of ships folding into real space just beyond Saturn, the final wave. He could feel their presence already. Cold, precise, ancient, unimpressed by Earth, unimpressed by humans. They were coming to erase a problem before it spread, and Kyle was the one thing standing in their way. But he was no longer alone. The Argonaut was alive, the crew was awake, and the core was ready. They came without sound. The Valari fleet unfolded into Saturn's orbit like black wings stretching across the void. Their ships were not built, they were grown. Towering biomechanical constructs with no visible engines, no heat signatures, no transmissions. They drifted like corpses and struck like predators. One moment the system was quiet. The next, Neptune was gone, shattered into floating shards of ice and debris. Not a warning shot, a message. The Federation scrambled what ships it could, but they were scattered, uncoordinated, and outdated. Their finest vessels were designed for orbital suppression and colonial policing, not apocalyptic warfare. Kyle stood on the Argonaut's bridge, watching it all through the ship's mind. He didn't need sensors anymore. He felt the Valari as if they were a storm pressing against his skull. Cold, clinical, ancient in a way that defied time. They were not here to conquer. They were here to cleanse. The Federation issued one last desperate message. To the Argonaut, to Kale Ren, we do not support you. We do not stand against you. Do what must be done, but do not bring this war to Earth. It was a coward's cry. Kale didn't answer. Ryan moved beside him, pale light flickering in his irises. They'll test our edge first. A probe wave. Standard Valari doctrine. They're searching for weakness. We don't have any, Kale replied, voice calm but distant. His mind was deeper now, half in the core, half outside time. He had grown past fear, past limits. The core had threaded through every part of him. His blood hummed with dark light particles. His thoughts bent probability like gravity. He was no longer just Kale Ren. He was what came next. And the Valari knew it. The first attack wave reached Luna's orbit 20 minutes later. 7 ships, each the size of a small city, covered in dark plating that absorbed all scans. They released a swarm of silicate organisms, half machine, half virus. They didn't fire weapons. They ate structures, bit by bit, atom by atom. The outer layer of Luna Base was breached in seconds. Federation defenses collapsed almost instantly, but the Argonaut was ready. Kyle raised his hand. Not to a control panel. Not to speak. Just a gesture. The core responded with a low roar that shook every particle of the ship. And then the Argonaut struck back. It didn't fire missiles. It rewrote reality. The core unleashed a compression wave, folding space in a ring around the ship. The Valari swarm was caught mid-attack, and for a moment nothing happened. Then each creature froze, locked in a stutter of time. Then they shattered. Not exploded. They fragmented along lines of probability, disassembling into fragments of light and data, like their very existence had been denied. Kyle didn't stop there. With a thought, he connected to Luna Base, pulling those who had been seeded, those whose minds had started to shift, to grow like his. Scientists, technicians, even a few soldiers. They responded immediately, sinking with the ship. Some collapsed under the strain, others rose as something else, a new generation of human. Kyle broadcast a single thought to them all. They think we're the virus. Let's make them right. The second Valari wave came faster. This time they didn't probe. They attacked. 50 ships descended from Saturn's shadow, weapons glowing with pure entropy. They unleashed distortion beams that tore matter into noise. Entire moons were turned inside out. Federation cruisers evaporated in the blink of an eye. But the Argonaut didn't flinch. Kyle was no longer inside it. He was it. He moved like thought. The ship bent around him like armor. Its systems obeyed his will. The core was no longer guiding him. It was listening to him. And Kale did the one thing the Valari couldn't comprehend. He adapted, in real time. He ripped open a pocket of collapsed space behind one of the Valari ships, snapping it out of existence. He unleashed biomech constructs of his own, ones that had never existed before, formed from raw thought and the core's limitless memory. He rewrote physics, and the Valari fleet faltered. They weren't used to resistance. They weren't used to fear. But now, for the first time in eons, they hesitated. One Valari ship broke rank. It didn't fire. It spoke, not with sound, not with words, but with a wave of emotion so sharp it nearly cracked Kale's mind. A single message, buried in grief and fury and dread. You were not meant to survive. You are not part of the design. Kyle responded with something cold, final. Then maybe the design was flawed, and he tore it apart with a blink. The war had begun, but for the first time in 100,000 years, the Valari weren't just fighting chaos, they were fighting humanity. And this time? Humanity had learned how to fight like them. The Valari didn't retreat. They couldn't. Their entire existence was built on perfection, on control, on the erasure of anything that defied their ancient blueprint for the galaxy. Humanity wasn't just a threat. It was an insult, a glitch that had to be corrected. But Kale was no glitch. He was the answer. The Argonaut spun through the battlefield, a living spear of light and shadow. Its hull shimmered with adaptive energy, deflecting entropy beams and unraveling Valari constructs with surgical precision. The core pulsed at its heart, no longer just a power source but a mind, a collective will woven from Coil, the crew, and the countless futures the ship had witnessed. The solar system burned. Saturn's rings were shattered into glittering clouds of debris. Titan's surface boiled under stray distortion waves. Earth's skies glowed faintly red as atmospheric shields strained against the fallout of a war humanity wasn't ready to comprehend. The Federation fleet, what little remained, hung back, watching in stunned silence. They'd been reduced to spectators in their own survival. Kyle didn't care. His awareness stretched across the battlefield, a web of instinct and calculation. He saw every Valari ship, every maneuver, every flicker of their cold, ordered minds. They were fast, they were precise, but they were predictable. And humans? Humans were anything but. With a thought, Kyle unleashed a cascade of hybrid constructs, creatures born from the core's memory and his own imagination. They weren't drones or weapons. They were ideas made flesh, swarms of fractal beasts that rewrote their own code mid-flight, adapting faster than the Valari could counter. They tore through the enemy fleet like a plague, burrowing into biomechanical hulls and turning them to ash from within. The Valari responded with raw power. A flagship, larger than Luna itself, unfolded its core weapon, a singularity lance, a beam of collapsed space-time that could erase entire planets. It aimed directly at the Argonaut. Kale felt it coming before it fired. Time slowed. The core whispered, not in words, but in a flood of possibilities. He could dodge, he could counter, he could redirect the energy, or he could end this. Kyle chose. He didn't move the Argonaut. He moved himself. His body dissolved into light, into data, into the raw essence of the core's power. He became the ship, the battlefield, the war itself. His consciousness stretched across the solar system, a burning thread of defiance. The singularity lance fired, and Kale caught it, not with technology, not with force, with will. He held the beam in place, its black heart screaming against his grip. The Valari flagship shuddered, its systems overloading as it tried to push through. Kale felt their confusion, their panic, their ancient arrogance cracking like glass. "You wanted to erase us," he said, his voice echoing through every Valari mind, every human soul, every fragment of the battlefield. "But we're not your mistake. We're your future." With a final pulse, he turned the lance back on its source. The flagship didn't explode. It ceased. A silent implosion swallowed it whole, leaving nothing but a ripple in space and a stunned Valari fleet. The tide turned. The Argonaut's crew, now fully integrated, their bodies laced with alien tech and human grit, took the fight to the enemy. Ryan led a boarding assault on a Valari dreadnought, tearing through its defenses with weapons that shifted form mid-strike. The seated scientists on Luna Base unleashed makeshift arrays, bending gravity and time to trap Valari ships in loops they couldn't escape. And Earth watched. The Federation's leaders, hidden in bunkers, saw the impossible. A single ship, a handful of humans, and a man who was no longer entirely human holding back an Armageddon. But victory wasn't clean. The Argonaut was wounded. Its hull bled energy, its systems fraying under the strain of a war it was never meant to fight alone. The crew was faltering, some burned out from the core's integration, their minds unable to handle the weight of centuries poured into seconds. And Kyle was fading. He could feel it. The core had given him everything, power, knowledge, purpose, but it was burning through him. His humanity was a flickering flame, consumed by the godlike force he'd become. He had one last choice. With the Valari fleet in disarray, Kale turned his focus inward, to the core, to the ship, to the future it carried. "Ryan," he said, his voice a whisper across the ship's network. "You know what comes next." Ryan, bloodied and half-broken, nodded from the dreadnought's ruins. "We'll carry it. We'll teach them." Kyle smiled, though no one could see it. He reached into the core one final time, and he gave it everything. His memories, his fears, his hope, his humanity. The core drank it all, transforming it into a signal, a beacon that would carry the Argonaut's truth to every corner of the galaxy. A message for humanity, not just to survive, but to evolve, to become something the Valari could never predict. The Argonaut flared brighter than a star. The remaining Valari ships froze, then fled, folding into the void as their resolve shattered. And Kale Ren was gone. When the light faded, the Argonaut hung silent in Luna's orbit. The war was over. The Valari were gone. For now. The Federation emerged from its bunkers, shaken, humbled, and forced to face a new reality. The Argonaut's crew, led by Ryan, stepped onto Earth not as heroes, but as harbingers. They carried the core's knowledge, ready to seed it into a species that would never be the same. Luna Base was rebuilt. The Argonaut was studied, not as a weapon, but as a teacher. And across the colonies, whispers spread of a man who had become a myth, a scientist who had faced gods and rewritten the stars. They called him the First, not because he was the strongest, but because he was the spark. The Valari would return one day. Everyone knew it. But when they did, humanity wouldn't just fight. It would burn brighter than they could ever imagine. Epilogue. Years later, a child on a distant colony world found a fragment of alien metal buried in the soil. It hummed faintly, glowing blue under her touch. She didn't know what it was, but when she held it, she dreamed. She dreamed of a ship that sailed through time, of a war that wasn't the end, but the beginning, and of a voice, soft and certain, whispering, "You are enough." The message came on all frequencies, in all languages, across every screen and neural interface on Earth. Your species is inadequate. Submit or be eliminated. That was 3 years ago. I still remember how my coffee cup slipped from my fingers in the NASA control room, shattering against the floor as those arrogant words scrolled across our monitors. The Vex Thari, as they called themselves, had simply appeared one day, their massive ships blotting out the stars above every major city on Earth. They were tall, crystalline beings that moved with liquid grace, their translucent bodies refracting light in ways that made them seem almost divine. Almost. Until you saw the contempt in their faceted eyes. Humans, their ambassador had declared during the first contact meeting at the UN, are a primitive species playing with forces beyond their comprehension. Your technology is crude. Your bodies are fragile. Your minds are limited. The way they said it, like they were discussing particularly slow children, made my blood boil even now. I'm Dr. Olivia Bennett, lead researcher for Project Phoenix, and I was there when they gave us their ultimatum. Submit to their guidance, become a protectorate species under their benevolent rule, or face extinction. They gave us 1 month to decide. The world leaders tried diplomacy first, of course, offered cultural exchange, trade agreements, even technological collaboration. The Vex Thari dismissed it all with that same crystalline laugh that sounded like breaking glass. "What could you possibly offer us?" their ambassador had asked, genuine amusement in their multifaceted eyes. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that humans had something they'd never encountered before. Desperation mixed with pure, stubborn defiance. While the politicians talked, people like me were working. The Vex Thari had made one crucial mistake. They'd shown us their technology. Just glimpses, but for humans, glimpses were enough. In my lab, deep beneath the Rocky Mountains, we worked without sleep, analyzing every scrap of data we could gather about their crystalline biology. They thought their physical form made them superior. They never considered it might be their greatest weakness. Dr. Bennett, Maya, my assistant, called out to me now, her voice trembling with excitement. "The latest simulation results. You need to see this." I moved to her station, scanning the holographic display floating above her desk. The numbers made my heart race. "Run it again," I ordered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Triple-check everything." The next hour was the longest of my life. Each verification came back positive. What we discovered wasn't just a weakness. It was the key to everything. The Vex Thari's crystalline structure, the very thing that made them seem so superior, could be disrupted by a specific frequency of sonic waves. But not just disrupted, completely rewritten. "Get me the Joint Chiefs," I said, my fingers already flying over the keyboard, preparing the briefing. "And someone wake up the president." That was the moment everything changed. The moment we stopped being the primitive species they'd dismissed, the moment we started fighting back. The Vexthari had called us inadequate, had expected us to kneel. They never imagined that their ultimatum would unite humanity like nothing else in our history. They never considered that giving us a deadline would focus our efforts, drive our innovation, push us to evolve faster than any species they'd encountered before. They thought they were giving us time to accept our fate. Instead, they gave us time to find their weakness. And now, as I prepare to present our findings to Earth's Unified Defense Council, I can't help but smile. The Vexthari are about to learn what humans do best: adapt, overcome, and turn the tables when everyone else thinks we're finished. They said humans couldn't win. They're about to learn just how wrong they were. The Defense Council chamber was silent as I finished my presentation. 50 of Earth's most powerful military and scientific leaders sat before me, their faces illuminated by the holographic models of Vexthari molecular structures rotating slowly above the center table. General Santos was the first to speak, her weathered face tight with controlled excitement. "You're telling us we can not only hurt them, but reprogram them?" "In essence, yes," I replied, zooming in on a particular crystalline formation. Their bodies are essentially living quantum computers. Their consciousness, their very essence, is encoded in these lattice structures. With the right frequency, we can rewrite their basic programming. Their superiority is about to become their downfall. How long to weaponize this? The Chinese military representative leaned forward, his eyes sharp. I shared a look with Maya before answering. "We've already done it. The prototype sonic emitter is ready for mass production. We can have them deployed globally within 2 weeks. The Vexthari's deadline is in 10 days, someone pointed out from the back of the room. "Then we'll have to work faster," I said firmly. "We've already transmitted the specifications to manufacturing facilities on every continent. The beauty of this weapon is its simplicity. It can be produced using existing audio technology with minimal modifications." The next week was a blur of activity. While the world above carried on its charade of preparing for submission, underground facilities worked around the clock. The Vexthari watched our obvious military movements with amusement, never noticing the real threat being built in converted recording studios and audio research labs. They didn't even try to stop our primitive radio broadcasts when we began testing the frequencies. Why would they? To them, our electromagnetic communications were like stone tools to a spacefaring race. 3 days before their deadline, we were ready. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity, a synchronized global broadcast on what we dubbed the Prometheus frequency. Every speaker, every sound system, every audio device on Earth would transmit simultaneously. The night before the attack, I couldn't sleep. I stood at my lab window, looking up at the Vexthari ships that still hung in our sky like crystalline shadows. "Are we doing the right thing?" Maya asked softly, joining me. "They gave us no choice," I replied. But the weight of what we were about to do sat heavy on my shoulders. We weren't just going to defeat them, we were going to fundamentally change their entire species. The ethical implications were staggering. "What do you think they'll become?" she wondered. I shook my head. "The simulations suggest the frequency will rewrite their base programming to something more, compatible with human consciousness. They'll retain their memories, their intelligence, but their fundamental drive to dominate should be replaced with a capacity for true cooperation. We're going to forcibly evolve them," Maya said, and I heard the mix of awe and horror in her voice. "They wanted to subjugate us, to make us what they wanted," I said firmly. "Instead, we're going to show them what humanity has learned over our long, bloody history, that true strength comes from unity, not dominance. They're about to get a crash course in human values." Dawn broke over the Rockies, painting the Vexthari ships in shades of pink and gold. In 3 hours, they expected our surrender. Instead, they were going to experience something their species had never known. Change. I touched the small device in my pocket, a quantum resonance recorder. Someone needed to document what was about to happen. Someone needed to remember what they had been, even as we transformed them into what they could become. "It's time," Maya said softly, checking her watch. I nodded, turning away from the window. "Send the signal. Tell everyone. Tell everyone to begin." The first indication that something was happening came as a subtle vibration, more felt than heard. The Vexthari ships above Denver shimmered slightly, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. In my hand, the quantum resonance recorder was already capturing everything, humanity's moment of revolution. "Frequency synchronization at 97% globally," Maya reported, her voice tense as she monitored the worldwide network. "Australia's online, Europe's online, the Americas, we're all broadcasting." The vibration grew stronger. Through the lab's reinforced windows, I watched as the crystalline surfaces of the nearest ship began to pulse with an inner light. The sight reminded me of a heart beating, ironic, since the Vexthari had always prided themselves on being beyond such primitive biological functions. Then the screaming began. It wasn't a sound any human throat could make. It was the cry of crystal under stress, a high, piercing keen that made my teeth ache. The Vexthari ships began to glow brighter, their previously perfect surfaces developing hairline fractures that spread like lightning across their hulls. "Doctor? Bennett," Maya's voice was urgent. "We're getting reports of Vexthari ground forces. They're changing." The main screen filled with footage from around the world. In New York, a Vexthari overseer had fallen to their knees, their crystalline form pulsing with rainbow light. In Beijing, 3 of them held each other as their bodies underwent some kind of transformation. And in London, one stood perfectly still, tears of liquid crystal running down their faceted face as their body slowly became translucent, then transparent, revealing complex patterns of light within. "Their neural patterns are reorganizing," I said, watching the data stream across my monitors. "The frequency is rewriting their basic drives, just as we predicted. But this—" I gestured to the screens. "This physical transformation is unexpected." A sudden flash of light from above drew our attention back to the windows. The Vexthari mothership was now glowing so brightly it hurt to look at directly. As we watched, sections of it began to shift and flow, like ice melting and refreezing in new patterns. All their technology was based on their crystalline nature, Maya realized aloud. "We're not just changing them, we're changing everything they built." She was right. The ships weren't just ships. They were extensions of the Vexthari themselves, grown rather than built. As their creators transformed, so too did their creations. The process lasted exactly 17 minutes and 43 seconds. I know because I checked the recorder's timestamp later. 17 minutes to fundamentally change an entire species. 17 minutes to turn would-be conquerors into something else. When the light finally faded, the ships above were unrecognizable. Where sharp, aggressive crystalline structures had been, now floated organic-looking structures that seemed to flow and pulse with inner light. They reminded me of massive soap bubbles, if soap bubbles were made of living crystal and thought. "Dr. Bennett," a voice called from the communications station. "The Vexthari ambassador is requesting to speak with you personally. They're crying." I took a deep breath, straightening my lab coat. This was the moment of truth. We'd gambled everything on our understanding of their biology, on our calculations, on our belief that we could change them without destroying them. Now we would find out what exactly we'd created. "Put them through," I said, turning to face the main screen. Let's meet our new neighbors. The face that appeared was both familiar and startlingly different. The ambassador's crystalline features had softened somehow, and light pulsed through their form in complex patterns that seemed to convey emotion. Their eyes, once cold and faceted, now swirled with colors I had no names for. "Dr. Bennett," they said, and their voice was like chimes in the wind. There are no words in your language for what we have become." "We see now," the ambassador continued, their voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in my chest. "We see everything we were blind to before. The complexity, the beauty of interconnection, the strength that comes from diversity rather than uniformity." They paused, colors rippling through their now translucent form. We were so wrong about humanity. I found myself gripping the edge of the console, my knuckles white. This was more than we'd hoped for, but also terrifying in its implications. We hadn't just changed their aggression, we'd fundamentally altered how they perceived reality itself. "The others," I said carefully, "your people in the other ships, in your colonies, are they—" "We are all changed," they replied. "We are still connected, but not in the rigid hierarchy of before. Now it's—" They struggled for words. Imagine a symphony where every instrument can compose its own melody while still remaining in harmony with the whole. Reports were flooding in from around the world. Every Vexthari, from their highest leaders to their youngest members, had undergone the same transformation. Their technology, an extension of their crystalline nature, had evolved with them. The weapons they'd planned to use for our subjugation had transformed into tools of creation and exploration. "There will be those among my people who question what you've done to us," Maya pointed out, her scientific caution asserting itself. "We essentially forced an evolution upon your entire species without consent." The ambassador's form pulsed with what I was beginning to recognize as their version of thoughtful consideration. "Just as we were preparing to force your species into submission or extinction," they responded, "but you chose to transform rather than destroy. That choice, that capacity for innovation coupled with mercy, it is exactly what we failed to see in humanity before." Suddenly, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Maya rushed to her station. "Multiple objects entering the solar system," she reported, her face pale. They're Vexthari ships. The rest of the fleet, the ones that weren't in Earth orbit." My heart sank. Of course, the ships near Earth weren't their entire civilization. We'd changed those within range of our broadcast. But what about the others? Had we just made Earth a target for revenge? The ambassador's form brightened. "Do not fear," they said, and there was something like joy in their melodic voice. "Watch." On our screens we could see the approaching fleet, their ships still bearing the sharp, aggressive crystalline forms of the original Vexthari design. But as they drew closer to Earth, something extraordinary happened. The transformed ships in Earth orbit began to resonate, sending out pulses of light that rippled through space like waves on a pond. "The frequency," I breathed, understanding dawning. "It's self-propagating through your natural quantum connections." "Yes," the ambassador confirmed. "What you began, we now continue. Our entire civilization will transform, not through force, but through the natural resonance of truth recognized." We watched in awe as the approaching ships began to change, their transformation more graceful than the forced evolution we'd triggered. Like a time lapse of crystalline flowers blooming, their forms shifted and flowed into new configurations. "Dr. Bennett," the ambassador said softly, drawing my attention back to the screen. "We came here believing we would find primitives to control or eliminate. Instead, we found teachers. The question now is, are you ready for what comes next?" "What does come next?" I asked, aware that every word of this conversation was being recorded and would be studied by historians for centuries to come. The ambassador's form shimmered with complex patterns. Now we learn from each other. You've shown us a new way to exist. Perhaps we can show you what your own potential truly is. The next few weeks changed everything we thought we knew about not just the Vexthari, but about the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. In research facilities across the globe, humans and transformed Vexthari worked side by side, sharing insights that bridged the gap between our different forms of existence. I spent most of my time with the ambassador, whom we now called Aurora, a name they chose after experiencing their first Earth sunrise in their new form. Their ability to perceive and process information had evolved far beyond their original crystalline constraints. "Your transformation," I said one evening, as we sat in my lab reviewing data. "It wasn't just physical, was it? You gained something more than just a new perspective." Aurora's form shimmered with what I'd learned to recognize as their equivalent of a smile. "We gained the ability to see between the lines," they explained. "Before, we perceived reality as absolute, binary, crystalline in its rigidity. Now we see the spaces between, the quantum foam of possibility that your species has always intuited but never fully grasped." They gestured, and the air between us filled with dancing patterns of light, a visual representation of quantum states that should have been impossible to perceive at our macro scale. "Your species' greatest strength was never your technology or your physical capabilities. It was your ability to imagine what could be rather than accepting what is." The implications of their words were staggering. Humanity had accidentally given the Vexthari something they'd never had before: the ability to dream. Reports came in daily of new breakthroughs. In Japan, a joint team had developed a way to use modified Vexthari technology to clean the oceans of microplastics. In Brazil, they were regrowing rainforests at an unprecedented rate. And in orbit, the transformed ships were teaching us about forms of space travel we'd never even imagined. But not everyone was celebrating. I received a secured message from General Santos that evening that brought me crashing back to political reality. "Dr. Bennett," her hologram said gravely, "there's concern among certain parties that we've made ourselves vulnerable. The Vexthari may seem changed, but we have no long-term proof this transformation is permanent. Some are suggesting we need contingency plans." I could feel Aurora's presence behind me, their crystalline form pulsing with subtle colors. They'd heard everything, of course. Their senses now extended far beyond what we'd initially understood. "Your leaders fear what they do not understand," Aurora said, their voice carrying harmonics of both sadness and understanding. "Just as we once feared what we could not control. Perhaps it is time to show them what true cooperation can achieve." They moved to the center of the lab, their form beginning to glow with an inner light that made the air itself seem to vibrate with possibility. "Dr. Bennett, would you assist me in a demonstration? One that might help your species understand that the greatest power lies not in weapons or control, but in the space between fear and trust." I nodded, understanding that we were about to cross another threshold. The transformation we'd triggered wasn't just about changing the Vexthari. It was about changing ourselves, about learning to see beyond our own limitations and fears. "Tell General Santos to gather your world's leaders," Aurora said, their form now pulsing with complex patterns I'd never seen before. "It's time to show humanity what you've really created. Not just a changed enemy, but a doorway to your own evolution." The United Nations General Assembly Hall had never seen anything quite like this. World leaders sat in stunned silence as Aurora hovered above the central podium, their crystalline form casting rainbow patterns across every surface. Behind them, through the hall's massive windows, their transformed ships created an aurora-like display in the New York sky. What we offer today, Aurora's voice resonated through the chamber, is not just technology or knowledge. We offer you a choice, the same choice you gave us, though yours will come without compulsion. I stood at the side of the stage, my heart racing. We'd rehearsed this, discussed every detail, but seeing it unfold still left me breathless. Maya squeezed my hand, her presence anchoring me in the moment. Your species, Aurora continued, exists in a unique state. You are quantum beings trapped in classical bodies. Your minds touch the infinite, but your forms hold you back. We never saw this before. How could we? We were too rigid, too certain of our superiority. But now we understand what makes humanity special. Their form expanded, filling the air with crystalline patterns that seemed to extend into dimensions we couldn't quite perceive. In the audience, people gasped as the patterns began to intersect with their own bodies, creating brief moments of resonance that left them glowing faintly. You dream, Aurora said simply. You imagine. You see what isn't and make it real. This gift, this ability to transform possibility into reality, it is the most powerful force we have ever encountered. And now, we can help you fully embrace it. The Chinese president stood up, his face a mixture of wonder and concern. What exactly are you proposing? Aurora's form pulsed with warm colors. We propose teaching humanity how to access the quantum layer of reality consciously, not through external technology, but through the development of abilities that already lie dormant in your species. You wouldn't become like us. You would become more fully yourselves. This is dangerous, General Santos interjected from her seat. We're talking about fundamentally altering human nature. I stepped forward then, knowing it was my time to speak. No, I said, my voice carrying through the hall. We're talking about understanding human nature for the first time. The Vexthari didn't come here to conquer us anymore. They came to wake us up. Aurora nodded, their form creating patterns that somehow made perfect sense to our minds, despite their impossible geometry. Dr. Bennett is correct. Your species stands at a crossroads. You can remain as you are, and we will respect that choice. Or you can take the next step in your evolution, conscious, willing, and united. The hall erupted in overlapping conversations, fears and hopes all mingling together. But I wasn't paying attention to them. I was watching the patterns Aurora was creating, seeing for the first time how they intersected with the quantum fields that underlay all reality. And I understood what they were really offering. Not just an advancement, but an awakening. Show them, I whispered to Aurora. Show them what I saw in the lab. Aurora's form brightened, and suddenly the entire hall was filled with living light, each pattern connecting to something deep within every person present. For just a moment, we all saw it. The infinite web of possibility that connected everything. The quantum dance that our minds had always sensed but never fully perceived. When the light faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. Even the most hardened skeptics sat in stunned silence, touched by something they couldn't deny. That, Aurora said softly, is just the beginning. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in human history, every nation, every leader, every voice in that hall agreed on something truly transformative. We would embark on this new journey together, not as conquerors or the conquered, but as partners in discovery. In the months that followed, humanity and the Vexthari, now calling themselves the Luminari, reflecting their new understanding, worked side by side to unlock the potential within us all. The process was gradual, guided by the Luminari's deep understanding of quantum consciousness and humanity's innate creativity. We didn't lose what made us human. Instead, we gained the ability to see the world as it truly was, a tapestry of infinite possibilities. The first breakthrough came when a child in Nairobi playing with a Luminari teaching device, accidentally projected her imagination into reality, creating a small, glowing flower that pulsed with life. Then a scientist in Berlin, meditating on quantum equations, found he could manipulate matter at the atomic level with nothing but his focused intent. These abilities weren't limited to a select few. They were latent in all of us, waiting to be awakened. But with this new power came responsibility. The Luminary taught us not just how to access these abilities, but how to use them wisely. We learned to see the interconnectedness of all things, to understand that every action rippled through the quantum fabric of reality. Wars ended not through force, but through the simple act of understanding. Poverty and hunger vanished as we learned to manifest what we needed from the quantum field itself. Earth transformed. Cities became living works of art, blending human creativity with luminary technology. The air cleared, the oceans healed, and the planet began to thrive in ways we'd never imagined possible. And beyond Earth, our reach extended into the stars. The luminary ships, now powered by the combined consciousness of both species, carried us to worlds we'd only dreamed of visiting. I stood with Aurora one evening, looking out over a city that pulsed with life and light. "We thought we were saving ourselves," I said, my voice filled with wonder. "But we were saving each other." Aurora's form shimmered with colors I still couldn't name. "You showed us the power of imagination, of dreaming, and we showed you the science behind it. Together we've created something entirely new, a civilization that understands its place in the universe." As I looked out at the world we'd created, I realized this was just the beginning. The Luminari had once thought themselves the pinnacle of evolution. We'd thought ourselves insignificant in the grand scheme of the cosmos. But together, we'd discovered that the true power lies in the space between, in the connections we forge, the dreams we share, and the infinite possibilities we create together. The stars above us seemed closer now, not just in distance, but in understanding. And as I reached out with my newly awakened quantum senses, I could feel the universe itself responding, ready to show us wonders beyond our wildest dreams. We had changed the Vexthari. They had changed us, and together we would change everything.